Hello and welcome to the Cleft Mama podcast. This is a supportive space for families navigating life with a baby diagnosed with a cleft lip and/or palate. Here we share real experiences, practical guidance, and conversations with parents and professionals to help you feel informed, supported, and less alone. I'm your host, Anja Paune, and I'm excited to get started. Hello! Today I want to talk about something that changed how I think about the cleft palate treatment, the tongue. And I know that might sound like a strange topic for an entire episode, but bear with me. Before I started reading more about cleft care, I honestly thought the tongue was mainly important for feeding and later for speech. I had no idea it also plays an important role in how the upper jaw develops and even how the cleft itself can change over time. So once I understood this, a lot of things made a bit more sense to me, including why some cleft centers around the world use a plate in the palate before the surgery. So let's start with the tongue itself. As you may know, the tongue is actually one of the muscles in the body. And on a side note, it's not the strongest muscle in the body. That's a popular myth. And it is the hardest working muscle in your body. But the glutes, the jaw, or the heart are stronger muscles, for example. Anyway, let's go back to the tongue itself. It is a very strong muscle. And it isn't just sitting passively inside the mouth. It's constantly moving. And also when it is in a resting position, it is applying pressure to the surrounding structures. So normally in a baby without the cleft, or also in you and me, when the tongue is at rest, it rests gently against the palate. So this is the natural resting position of the tongue. It's resting against the roof of the mouth. And this is actually important for the normal growth of the upper jaw. But babies born with a cleft palate have a very different anatomy. So the palate there isn't closed. And as we know, instead there is a gap in the palate. So from the very beginning of life, which is even before birth, the tongue can move into that gap. And in fact, the babies with a cleft don't know their mouth any differently. To them, that is completely normal. That's how they've always been as they developed. If you have a piece of food stuck between your teeth, for example, even without thinking about it, your tongue automatically goes to that area and it's trying to get in between those teeth. So it's an automatic reflex. And for babies with a cleft, the same thing happens. But because the gap has always been there, the tongue naturally explores that space over and over again. And over time, this repeated pressure may contribute to the cleft becoming wider as the baby's face grows. And at the same time, because the tongue is spending more time inside the cleft or resting lower in the floor of the mouth, it isn't able to rest against the palate in the way it normally would, how it does for us or a baby without a cleft. So why does that matter, or why is that interesting now? Well, because the tongue doesn't just move food around, it also provides gentle, continuous pressure. It helps stimulate the normal growth of the upper jaw. And without that natural stimulation, an important growth signal may be missing. So this is now where those plates come in, if you've heard about them. And those are plates that are inserted into the baby's mouth and then they are going into the roof of the mouth. So many people think that those plates are there to help babies feed, but that's actually not the case. So it can make feeding easier for some babies. It definitely still doesn't allow them to create suction, but that's also not its main purpose. One of the most important functions for those plates is to separate the mouth from the nose. And it's also providing a surface for the tongue to rest against. So having that separation between the mouth and the nose also means that those environments and the bacteria and germs that are separated between mouth and nose, which is also very important for development. But also just having that separation means that instead of moving up into the cleft, the tongue now can rest against the plate. That means it's spending less time pressing into the cleft and more time in a position that's closer to the normal physiology. So this alone may already help reduce the widening of the cleft, while also encouraging more favorable growth of the upper jaw. And that in turn now means by keeping the tongue out of the cleft, it can allow the two sides of the cleft to come closer together before the surgery, because the tongue is no longer pressing against it. And then if that's possible, as the baby just grows and their face grows, those sides come closer together, and that then means less distance for the surgeon to close in the surgery. So in some cases, that can make the surgery a little gentler because less tissue needs to be moved to repair the cleft. It's maybe important as well to mention that not all the plates work in the same way. So there are two different types, and they are passive or active plates. So for passive plates, they don't actively push the jaw into a new position, and they're just passive. So instead, they just guide the growth by giving the tongue somewhere to rest against. So again, simply by keeping the tongue out of the cleft, out of that gap. As the baby grows, the jaw naturally can grow bigger and into a better position and bring that gap together already just by keeping the tongue out. But then there are also more active plates, and these contain small screws that are adjusted over time, and they still work rather than simply pushing the two sides together. They just gently rotate and guide the jaw segments into a better position. So they're usually only used in specific babies that have a larger cleft, where there's enough bone for the active plate to actually be attached to. So they need enough bone for the plate to work effectively. So which type of plate, if any plate at all, is used depends on the individual baby. And then things like the size of the cleft, the position of the jaw segments, the treatment philosophy of the cleft center, they all play a role. And so for those centers that are using plates, they obviously wanted to find out which plate is better, active or passive plates. So I found a study where the researchers followed babies that had a unilateral cleft lip and palate. They followed them from birth until 1 year after the surgery. And some of these babies had active plates and others had passive plates. And they found that both types of plates help to reduce the width of the cleft before the surgery. So on average, the cleft became about 5 millimeters narrower. The active plates were even more effective for babies that had larger clefts, and the passive plates were also working really well for babies with a smaller cleft. They also confirmed that both of these plates influenced how the upper jaw grew over time, and their conclusion was that both types of plates can be helpful, but active plates may be the better choice for wider clefts, and passive plates are often sufficient for smaller clefts. So passive plates, as the name entails, are more passive, so the parents don't actively need to screw the plate to change their size and position. So it is less involvement in those passive plates, and they are sufficient in a lot of cases. But you might be wondering why I'm talking about that, and you're totally aware of that. Not every cleft center uses plates, and I could not find any in the UK that are actually using them. And I had also spoken to my cleft nurse about that, and she also confirmed that they are not in use, and she said they are no longer used, which sounded like there was a time when they actually had been used. But treatment approaches vary quite a bit between countries and even between hospitals, and there are certain differences in the philosophies based on the different interpretation of the evidence and clinical experience. Also, I have a feeling that, at least in the UK, funding may also play a role, because those plates are made specifically for every single baby. So those babies will have an imprint made when they're very young, And then the plates have to be developed just for those babies. And they might even need several plates throughout their first few months of life until they have their first surgery. So it is definitely quite costly as well. And I feel that this may play a role as well why they are not used in the UK. I obviously wanted to understand as well what are the studies to show evidence on whether those plates work versus not using any plates. So there were researchers, they were in Chile actually, but they looked at studies from worldwide, so from all over the world. And they looked at the best available studies on using plates for babies with cleft lip and cleft palate. And they wanted to find out if these plates improve the shape and the growth of the upper jaw, the facial developments, how the teeth come together, but also the parents' satisfaction with the treatment. And they didn't really find a good answer. Overall, they found that there just isn't good enough quality evidence to show that plates provide clear long-term benefits. So some studies were found that suggested there are possible benefits, and then others found little or no difference. But yeah, because this available research is limited and the results are inconsistent, the authors concluded that they wouldn't recommend to routinely use plates until stronger evidence is available. They also found that there is no evidence that plates cause any harm, so that is reassuring, but yeah, they said more high-quality research is needed. And overall, it's really difficult to understand or to find those studies, really, because it's not only those plates that differ between different centers and different countries, but at the same time, there are so many different surgery techniques that are being used. It's then difficult for researchers to pinpoint exactly this was because of the plate versus this was because a different type of surgery was being used. So it probably would be possible to run a really randomized controlled high quality study on plate use, but it's difficult to find studies where you have exactly the same controls, because you would need to think it's babies that are being operated in the same center and some of them had a plate and some of them don't have a plate to then be able to compare. But because a center would always use a plate or would not use a plate, they wouldn't just pick between the babies or just randomly decide which babies get it versus don't get it. It's really hard to find good evidence for plates versus no plates. Well, for me personally, understanding the role of the tongue helped me make sense why some centers use plates. But just thinking from the parent perspective, obviously it would have been nice to have a plate and then bring the gap closer or narrow the gap already before surgery. Just I can imagine that would make the surgery easier and maybe lead to a better outcome. But at the same time, I also can't imagine having really a newborn where we would have to then insert the plate several times and then go and get a new plate made and getting the baby used to that one and cleaning it all the time, like putting it into the mouth and taking it out and so on. It's probably a lot of, additional work and additional worry to care for a baby that has a plate. But yeah, in the UK, we are not using that, but it was still interesting to find out how other countries are managing that and why are they actually using it. So I hope that was an interesting insight to explain the thinking behind using plates. And in general, I find that understanding why treatments are used makes the whole cleft journey feel a little less overwhelming. So I would like to hear from you. Did your baby have a plate? And if you're a healthcare professional that happens to be listening, I'd also love to hear how this is approached in your cleft center, because I think sharing different perspectives helps us all to learn. So a little more knowledge often leads to just being more confident in discussing the cleft journey with professionals, but also just with anyone really. And that's exactly what I'm hoping to bring you with this podcast. So thanks for listening, and I see your ears next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Cleft Mama podcast. I hope you get a ton of value out of our time together. You're not alone in this journey. And remember, you're doing an amazing job. If this episode helped you, please follow and share it with another parent who might benefit from it. See you next time.